Welcome to the Living Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Preston M. Smith. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Living Artist Podcast. I'm Preston M. Smith, at PMS Artwork everywhere on internet land and socials. I want to thank you for landing on this podcast. Whether you're a professional artist, just getting started in the art world, a collector of art, or just consider yourself a creative person, this podcast has something for you. I like to think of it as a fun way to rant and talk to other creative people about living the life of an artist, surviving and getting ahead in the art world, and enjoying your life. But most importantly, not waiting until you're dead to make it happen. All right, let's get started. All right, that's so you don't sue me later. You never said we were recording this. So how are you, Leah Perrino? Not Lee.
I'm doing good. Doing good in the circumstances. How about yourself?
Oh my God. Same thing. Yeah. I've been talking about it a lot, but it's one of those things where people like us, artists and creative people, we're kind of used to the isolation to an extent, but we don't have that ability to kind of take a pause. Like I normally go out on the weekends or at night with my wife or something, and then I kind of get that out of my system so I can come back into my isolation. And now it's just like isolation all the time.
Exactly. I feel like I'm going through waves of like, I'm thriving and I'm being super productive. And then of course I'm going through like slumps of just like, I don't want to do anything. And then it's weird because I mean, it's funny because I would normally be doing this anyway, like staying in and just doing my own thing. And it's kind of nice because now I don't have that added pressure of like the pressure of going out and being social or the FOMO or any of that.
Right.
So it's, that's kind of the positive side of it, but I'm missing like really like little things, like just going to my favorite neighborhood coffee shop or just like getting a change of environment. So that part is a huge bummer. And then of course, just the sadness and anxiety that is taking over all of us right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And being bombarded by bad news all the time. My wife comes home and she's just like, we put on the news and I'm like, okay, we're going to limit the news today. We're going to get what we need and then we're going to get out. But she's like, oh wait, hang on. There's one more. Oh, they're doing a live conference right now. We got to turn that on. And I'm just like, no, we're going to watch a movie. We're going to unplug. I mean, obviously it's good. She wants to be informed, but it starts to just kind of take over your whole psychology after a while. So you have to take some breaks from time to time.
Oh, absolutely. I've been pretty quiet on social media and I've been trying to stay off as much as possible just because of that exact reason. It was really overwhelming and it was inducing a lot of my own anxiety. So I was just like, I just need to unplug and not look at that. And I think just everybody being extra active because everyone's home and bored, like that was just too much too. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. There's too much content right now.
Oh, I know. It's crazy. Well, and you spoke about FOMO, which is interesting because it's like people are putting up old pictures and stuff, old things that they were doing. So you're kind of experiencing like a FOMO from the past. So I see people putting up something and I'm like, wait a minute. My first response is like, get home, get inside. But then I'm like, oh, this is from like a week ago or something, or like three months ago. So we're experiencing like delayed FOMO right now. But yeah,
exactly.
The social media is crazy. Like we kind of have to do it a little bit with art. I do it a lot more than I would if I wasn't an artist. I probably wouldn't even be on social media, but it's kind of like a double-edged sword right now. It gives you a chance to connect with people right now. It's when we're completely isolated. So that's nice. But then you can also go overboard and pretty soon your whole day is gone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It sucks you in.
Well, okay. So we're here with Leah Perrino. She's a graphic designer, writer, art curator, and founder of Asymmetric Magazine, which is awesome. Do you want to tell people a little bit about Asymmetric Magazine and how you started that? What was the impetus for starting that?
Sure. So Asymmetric is an independent LA-based art and music magazine. It's actually started with printing. We were making quarterly print issues, and then now it's solely digital just for the time being. But I kind of started, I mean, I went to school for both graphic design and journalism. So those were two really big passions of mine. And I was just trying to find ways to just connect all of these things that I love. Like I've always been exposed to visual art. I've always been exposed to music. And, I had all of these things and I just didn't know how to package it all up and produce something that had all of these elements of myself and everything I love and be able to share it with people. And I ultimately landed on creating a magazine. And when I moved to LA, which was, I'm from Ohio, so I moved to LA about 7 years ago. And that's when it really sparked. Like I had this concept that I knew I wanted to make a magazine when I was in Ohio. And then when I was in LA, I was just overwhelmed by the amount of artists and people just producing constantly.
Oh yeah.
And everyone has a story, and I got so inspired, and it just really sparked.
And everybody's going to be a star too.
Absolutely.
Sorry, God.
But yeah, so that's where it was really born, was LA. And my first job, so I couldn't get a job in journalism just out of school because it's such a weird thing. The program I went to school for doesn't even exist anymore because, journalism is a constantly changing and some would say dying field.
Right.
And I fell in love with the traditional journalism and print design and long feature writing and things that are obsolete nowadays.
Old school journalism.
Old school journalism. So I was really trying to find that, and I couldn't, and it was really, really discouraging. And my first job out of college, I ended up working in-house as a graphic designer, which ultimately turned into a photo retouching position. And it was just something that I absolutely hated and I dreaded every day. And when you're just out of college, you're so hungry for work. And had just moved to LA and everything was fresh. And I was so excited. And I was just at this job that just sucked all of my energy out of me and all of my creativity out of me. And it was so limiting. So I really just put
I can relate.
I really just put all of my energy into this magazine. And I was like, okay, so now not only is this a way to, package all these things that I love and use my skill set, but this is my creative outlet because I wasn't getting that at my job. And it really just took off from there. And I started bringing on collaborators, and a couple of which I still have, and some are in and out depending on their own personal projects. But it's really great. I've been able to interview so many artists, so many musicians, and I feel like, I've always been the friend in the friend group that's in charge of making playlists for every trip or every party or, just every event. So that's something that I've always prided myself on, is that I love sharing music discoveries and I love sharing art discoveries. And I just felt like there was just this need I wanted to bring people into the conversations with the artists. So that's why I publish everything in Q&A format. I wanted it to be inviting and welcoming. And I didn't want it to be this pretentious, let's talk about art in a snobby way. I wanted it to just be very
inaccessible to the common person.
Exactly. And, just kind of building this sense of community in the process. And then what it had evolved into was something I just never thought would happen, is I got really into events a couple years ago. And that's kind of the direction I'm taking it in now. And it's weird, not weird, but it's cool to be talking about it in this current climate, because prior to this pandemic, I was actually at a crossroads with Asymmetric, where I was just really trying to explore ways to stay relevant in the digital world and ways to intersect those things and make it super interactive. And, I was really struggling with a lot of artists with social media, even going back to that, it's artists, musicians, they're hosting their own live Q&As on Instagram Live. They're publishing everything from what they eat for breakfast to live streams. And it's why would you go to a magazine when you could just go to your favorite artist and get your questions answered there? And so I was struggling with that for a really long time, of just, what the future of art and music journalism looks like, and um, how to just stay relevant in the world. And I think um, it was kind of this like heavy cloud that was just looming over me. And I kind of took like an unintentional hiatus where I was publishing really at a really slow pace, just because I wanted to be as purposeful as possible. And I didn't want to just push content out that was getting buried in other things. And I think this pandemic has kind of forced me and a lot of other industries to go digital, whether we wanted to or not. And it's interesting
Exactly.
because I've been exploring more heavily just in the past month of being isolated, of just, okay, what are the next steps? And when this does end, how will I introduce the physical world back into it and add those levels of interactivity? And and I don't know what that looks like exactly right now, but it's something that's really exciting to me. And I'm really hopeful for a lot of positive changes after this time.
Yeah, there's so much there. I was thinking I should be taking notes as you're talking, but I was trying to listen. But yeah, I think everybody's going to be doing that. The question is, are you going to be going back to the physical afterwards? There's so many people now, I think, in so many different, like for example, with Shockbox, the gallery, they were doing those kind of Zoom meeting gallery exhibition openings, and it was very interesting. It doesn't take the place of of being there in person and seeing the texture and the color in person and meeting the artists in person. But it was interesting because it spaced everybody out, and it gave everybody kind of their platform to talk about each piece. So you ended up learning so much more about the individual piece than you would at the gallery, because you'd be stuck in a room talking to like one person for an hour or something. So it was interesting. It was like, well, are we going to kind of have some sort of amalgamation of these two things going forward, or is it going to kind of end up being more towards digital in the future? So do you think there is going to be a print version in the future, or do you think you're going to try to focus solely digitally?
I do think that there will be print. I definitely see, or I'm at least very hopeful that there will be a resurgence of that after this is all over. And I think that, in general, like the direction I was going with events, and I have only hosted a few public events so far in my career, but it's something that I'm just increasingly getting more interested in.
What do those look like? Sorry, I'm not aware of the
No.
public events.
Oh yeah. So basically, I just felt like that there was a need for, again, making art more approachable to the public. But I think for me, it stemmed out of a necessity that, when I was in my early 20s and I would be going out a lot, I just always craved like art events, or like, I'd be at a bar, but I would be wishing I was looking at art. And I
Right.
just always wanted to merge like the nightlife and art and music, and merge all of these things together in a way that brings a lot of people together and adds that sense of community. And the human connection aspect it's at the core of everything I do, whether it's the print magazine, whether it's digital, whether it's events. And I think so my events, what I want to do, and I'm not there yet because I'm still stuck with gallery limitations and of course other things. But I think, what I struggled with was, so there wasn't a lot of art going on at night on weekends. Art galleries had very weird hours, like 10 to 4. And all of my adult life, including up until now, I've always had a 9-to-5 job. So I was never able to go to those weird hours, or like art openings would, be from like 3 to 5 on a Saturday.
Right.
And now that I'm more working in the field, I do understand why those things are in place, but I still feel like there is a need and there is a want to, have a weekend that revolves around art and going out, but coming out of it, with a new perspective, or having talked to an artist, or, something that provokes you in a good way. And so I wanted to bring these events here. And I don't know if you had ever heard of the event Pancakes and Booze.
Oh yeah, I did a couple of those back in the day.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
I discovered them a few years
They've been
back,
around
and
for over a decade.
oh yeah, they've been around for a while. And I think that I went to my first one of those a few years back, and that's when I kind of first something sparked in my mind where I was like, okay, that is obviously very large scale, and I'm kind of aiming to do something a little more a little more small scale, but
Yeah.
that is something that I was just like, okay, this is really cool. I could go here on a Saturday night. It's
Waffles
from
and
like,
booze? Just a thought. No, just kidding. Sorry.
no, the pancake, I mean, like as you know, it's really cool in theory, really sticky in
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Like walking around looking at art with syrup on my hands.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But
Getting it
I
all.
just, what I really took away from those events and what I really loved about them was the fact that you are interacting with artists. It is sparking dialogue. It was an event that I looked forward to. I would go at 9 p.m. and stay till 1 a.m. Like it was my weekend event that weekend, and it revolved around it. And that's what, I don't want to have just another art opening. Like I want to
And it wasn't like a cold environment either. What, like some galleries you go to, it's very cold. Nobody's talking to each other.
Exactly.
Everything feels like at arm's length. You can't get close. And the pancakes and booze, I haven't been to one in a while, but when I used to go, it's like a party.
Exactly that. And that's exactly my vision for it. And I mean, like, I just loved how lively it was. There was live music, or if there wasn't live music, there was at least music playing. And one of my biggest pet peeves is walking into a gallery that's just like sterile and,
Oh my God.
and
Me
silent. Too. And, I do think, and that happens so often. And I do think, there is a significance in that introspective experience that you'll have with yourself. But more often than not, if there's a gallery opening I want to go to, it's me going by myself, walking into that sterile, weird environment, looking at the art for 15 minutes, walking out and like talking to no one. And
right.
Like I said, like, yeah, there are benefits to that. I think about the art. I can, interpret it. I take away a lot from that, but I think that there's so much more to experience when you're having a conversation, whether with the artists themselves or with other people that you may have not have ever met if you weren't at this event, and just bringing those people together. And again, like I said, like it's all about human connection for me. So those events were really, really important. And and as something else that I always like want to have to tie in the journalism aspect and the storytelling is at all of my events, I've always had a print takeaway, which was more or less like a hybrid of a magazine and a coffee table book. It was kind of like a special edition asymmetric issue, but, higher quality. And it would feature interviews with all the artists at the events. It would have all the art showcased. So it was kind of like a catalog, but it was definitely a keepsake. And that's something that I want to continue to do as well. And I do think there will be a need for that. And especially when this pandemic is over, I'm really hoping that there's just a resurgence and a new perspective on going to physical events and making them as purposeful as possible.
Yeah, I think people are going to be starved for it and they're going to come out. But at the same time, I'm a little worried that people are going to be hesitant because they're still afraid. Like at first I was like, okay, the cutoff is, whatever, April 19th. And then they're like, oh, it's going to be May. And then you start thinking about it. And because all this fear has been so deeply ingrained in your brain, it's like, are we safe? Are we safe to go back out at that point? So I share your optimism and I really hope so. But it's going to be interesting to see how long it actually takes. But I completely agree with you about music. For example, if you're going to a art opening, like why wouldn't you want to have music? Why wouldn't you want to have it be as vibrant and energetic as possible? Like for me, when I'm creating art, I have never not listening to music ever. And it feeds my art. And I can remember what I was listening to when I look back at a piece, almost to the point where like I want to have that specific song or playlist playing when people are like viewing my art, So I think you and I share kind of that, we have a similar music affinity.
Exactly. And I think it adds to the experience, and it allows, something I forgot to mention, it is at my past events, it's not only been, similar to an art opening in that the artists are there and there's art on the walls, but there's always been either live music or a DJ. And that's something I feel just really strongly about. And, my events have always been 2-day weekend pop-ups just to bring that lively experience to the table. And I do think, as a curator, I don't just want to curate art on the walls. I want to curate the whole experience for people. I hope that they're introduced to new music. I hope that, I would never want anyone to come to one of my events and feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Like, I just want them to feel like this is a really cool event and they're getting something out of it and they're learning something new or thinking a new thought or
Yeah, for sure. Or
anything really.
they don't feel excluded, you know?
Exactly. And I just think so many galleries do that. And, you know, I think the argument is that things like that take away from the art, but I think that there's a way to intersect them. And I just think it has to be done, you know, I feel like I keep using the word purposeful, but it just has to be done really intentionally and purposefully. And I think there's definitely a way to connect all of those dots.
I completely agree. It's interesting. So asymmetric, well, first of all, I was lucky enough to be interviewed by you. Now we're turning it back on you, but I got interviewed for my solo show at Shockbox, and that was an awesome experience. You have a platform with asymmetric for artists to be able to submit their work. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
So what does that look like? And what is like if they get in, what does a feature kind of look like for an artist?
Yeah, sure. So I would say right now it's probably an even split of artists I reach out to personally and artist submissions. And, you know, it all ends up looking the same. But when artists do submit their work, it's really cool for me because I just want to leave that window open because, I mean, I like to think that have my hand on the pulse and know what's going on in the art world, but there are so many things that, you know, it's impossible to keep up with everyone. So it's really cool to get those submissions and discover new artists myself. And with both visual art and music, we take submissions and, but yeah, that essentially just would be a similar process to if I reach out to an artist myself, except for when they submit, they are already interested. So that is good news for me. I don't have to, you know, worry about them saying no, they don't want to be featured.
Right. But do they submit like a portfolio? Or are they doing like a bio, resume type thing? Or are they just submitting images?
For the most part, they've been most artists submit around like a timely event. So it'll be if they have a show coming up, they'll submit kind of the collection of art that's in that show with any promotional materials for that show and details and things like that. And then that way, you know, I could feature them around that event. If they're just reaching out to talk about their current work in general, they'll usually pass along a link to their portfolio. I don't think I've ever received a resume, and I don't think I need to. I just love looking at the work, and that's enough for me. And
yeah, it should speak for itself, right?
Exactly. And usually, we just kind of get into it from there and set up an interview. And like I said, if it's timed around a show, even better. Especially with visual artists, I like to keep those as local as possible because we do time them up as best as we can around shows. So just trying to get that foot traffic into the shows and help promote those artists. But
that makes sense.
It's a pretty easy process. So I would encourage any artist to submit their work to me.
Yeah. So if you're an artist out there and you got a show coming up or something you want to share, go to Asymmetric. It's just asymmetric mag. What is it? Asymmetricmag.com?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Or you can look at Asymmetric on at Asymmetric on Instagram to check it out more too. But it's really cool. I love your new music recommendations because, man, for me, that's one of the few things I feel like I'm not out of touch with. It's just I'm interested and I'm doing so many things all the time now that I don't like. Music has not fallen by the wayside. I still listen to it, but I'm not getting as many new, fresh recommendations as I used to get. Like when I was in college, it was just like everything. I was exposed to everything. I was going to shows. Like you and I connected over Modest Mouse. I saw a couple of their first shows, in college, which kind of dates me. But I remember being in a little auditorium when they blew an amp and they had to pause the show, and then they blew another one. They had to cancel it. But it was so cool experiencing all that and seeing these artists evolve and these bands evolve. And it's so important to my work. I almost want to ask you for some recommendations. So if you kind of know my taste, if you got something on your mind right now, just throw it out there. Or I'll have to hit you up later.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's funny because when you said you're never not listening to music while you paint, like I literally thought in my head, I'm never not listening to music, period. Like,
Yeah, no, actually, that's true too. Yeah, like 80% of my day, I have my headphones on and I'm listening to music. If it's not that, it's a podcast.
exactly. So I'm constantly listening to music. It's funny because I do go through phases where, and again, since we bonded over Modest Mouse, and I think I mentioned this last time we chatted, but I grew up in the emo scene, so
Oh
I
yeah,
go through phases of just rediscovering those old bands, and I'll just listen to them on repeat. And then I, of course, go through my waves of discovering new music and doing that. And of course, as part of Asymmetric, I love to discover new music, make playlists, put out recommendations. But right now, my favorite band is Pine Grove, and has been for the past few years.
okay, I'm writing this down.
I think they were actually my artist of the decade on the Spotify Unwrapped at the end of the year.
Oh wow, artist of the decade.
Oh yeah, so
it.
so they've been a longtime favorite.
And what are they? What would you categorize them as genre-wise?
They're like new wave emo, but like indie rock, a little bit of Americana, kind of folky. And I don't normally
Ooh.
dive into the folky side, but Pine Grove is just and like there's something just so beautiful about their lyrics. Like they use a lot of like obscure vocabulary, and you'll just have to give them a listen. I love
Oh
them so
man,
much.
it sounds awesome. I'm gonna listen to them. They're not screaming "Hey" all the time, are they?
No, they are not.
Okay. When you said folky, I was just thinking, "Hey." Oh, okay, that's good. Nothing wrong with "Hey." Pine Grove is great. Sorry, you got another one?
I do. Well, I was just gonna say I'm still stuck on the new Tame Impala album. Really love that.
Tame Impala, yes.
And Purity Ring just came back with a new album. So I kind of covered the spectrum of indie rock and electronica and indie pop, but those are my favorites right now. Peach Pit is a
Purity
band
Ring?
I'm into. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it.
But yeah, those are some recommendations. I'm literally full of recommendations. So
awesome. I'm going to hit you up later too.
Playlist for anybody who wants one. So
okay, cool. I'm like, this is the real reason I've had you on, just to get some new music. No, not at all. Not at all. But that's just a bonus. That's awesome. And so another thing you're interested in is typography, right?
Yes.
Can you explain? I mean, I'm very much a novice when it comes to typography. I have a general idea, but could you kind of fill people in on what that is?
Absolutely. So, typography was a huge part of my studies in college when I went to school for graphic design. So, I mean, I'm such a font nerd. Like fonts and paper types, I will nerd about.
You and my wife.
I will nerd out on for hours. People literally have to be like, Leah, stop talking about fonts, please. But it's. I'm
assuming you've seen the documentary on fonts, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Called Helvetica or something?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay, good. You're like, I'm watching it right now.
It's on my favorites list.
Okay, cool.
No, but it's just something that like I can't really explain. It's actually funny. I've been thinking about like why I'm so drawn to graphic design over other art types. And I love all visual art, but I think for me, I'm such a perfectionist and I'm very OCD. And I think that comes into play a lot with typography because it's so, like if you actually look at a letter form, it's so gridded out and perfect. And I just like, there's just
a lot
something.
Of precision.
Exactly. And there's just something so like aesthetically pleasing to me about words. And even on paintings, like even if it's not, digital font or a stencil, if someone's just writing words over their painting with their paintbrush, like to me, I'm so drawn to that. I'm always so drawn to words. And I think that affinity with my passion for graphic design, it makes sense that, I'm a font nerd, but that's something that actually
#font nerd.
It's something it's funny that you asked me that during this period of isolation, because one of the personal projects that has been on the back burner for years for me that I'm finally I finally have the time to dive into is I am developing a couple of my own fonts. And
Oh, cool.
it's something that I've always, I don't know. I don't know if other artists feel this way, if you feel this way, but for me, like when I make something of graphic design, typography is always a huge element of it for me. I love oversized bold type. That's featured a lot in the print issues of Asymmetric. I love repeated type. Brutalism's getting a little worn out right now, but that was like a movement that I really liked. But I think
I was going to be like, totally, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
Brutalism is when I'm sure you've seen it so much. It's when, the same word will just be repeated over and over again and layered on top of each other and distorted a little bit. And I was really into that style for a really long time, and it's kind of burning out now. So I'm straying away from it. But I mean, there's like speaking of Helvetica, that's the font I use for Asymmetric. And I also have a favorite Helvetica adjacent font that is my top secret that I will not share. But that to me,
get that out of you.
Like something like that, like I feel so, I feel kind of like pretentious being like, oh, Helvetica, like I'm a cliche graphic designer. But it really is such a timeless font. It's something that I will always go back to. Like I love decorative fonts and I love all typography, but it's something like that. It's just, to me, it's so striking and so timeless, and I'll just never get sick of it. But yeah, for back to developing my own fonts, I think whenever I design something, there's always this part of me that wants every element to be mine. And, a lot of times I'm working with clients or I'm helping someone else's vision come to life. And I love that aspect of my job. But I think there's a part of me that wants to do so much personal work with, my own writing and my own fonts and my own design elements. And so that every piece of it is mine. And that would be, my truest art form that I can imagine.
That's cool. Like your next book of poetry will be not only your own words, but your own font.
Exactly. And I've been exploring a lot with like, in the Powerhouse show at Shockbox, I had some pieces in there that were typography based. And what I would love as like an end product, when I'm done developing these fonts, is to have, like posters or just art pieces that are digital design work. But, again, it's my font, it's my words, it's my color palettes, it's all other design elements that I've created. So that's kind of an end goal for me on like the personal project realm. But even just to use in Asymmetric, I think typography is such a great way. I mean, everything I do is all about storytelling. And I think that typography is such a great way to really visually impact that and draw people in with that. And
yeah, completely.
So that's why I love the oversized fonts, and I love like big and bold and just, a one word covering the entire spread of a magazine. I love that. So I think once I can develop my own fonts and just make it really, really signature Asymmetric or signature Leah, like that's what I would love.
That's so cool. You will have to put a little asterisk by it though, and explain to people that it's your own font, because there are going to be a lot of people who are completely oblivious to fonts, and they're going to be like, they're going to look at it, think it's cool, but they're not going to understand it. So if you explain that too, underneath the work, I think that'll just add to the work, because I think so many people, when they're creating a piece, they forget that a lot of the audience really doesn't have the vocabulary to understand or articulate what they're looking at. But if you give them those little details, it just kind of brings it to life for them. That would add to it for me, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And it's definitely like, I want it to be, I do want to develop fonts in my career that I will share and make available to other designers. But I do want to have like an archive of fonts that are just, it's what I use and that's my artistry, and no one else can access them. It's just like, it only appears on my work. And I think that would be really, really cool. But yeah, that's a great tip to make it known that they're my fonts.
That's so cool. And I'm assuming you can sell a font, right? What does that look like?
You can. I actually buy many fonts all of the time on a weekly basis. But I
She
mean,
has a little, she has a little collection in the back, in the corner of her room in a briefcase.
I do know, as like a funny side anecdote, this almost happens on a weekly basis. I'll get someone who will be like, hey, do you know what font this is? Or like, hey, can you find a similar font to this? And they know that I will. I'm like a human font generator. Like, I'm like,
oh my God.
I will go
You
and
shouldn't
find
say
it.
this. You're going to start getting a bunch of people hitting you up all the time now. Like, find me this font.
Request.
Yeah. Oh,
No,
that's, hey, new
like,
side hustle business idea. Font request.
I
There
was
you go.
actually just joking to my friend the other day that like all of my DMs are like, yeah, people slide into my DMs to like ask about fonts. Like
Oh my God.
that's my life. But
That's great. I'm sure it's tedious too, but but it's great.
But no, in terms of selling and buying fonts, I mean, for my clients, I mean, there are so many free fonts available, and free fonts are great. Like you could access a ton. But I think for a lot of my clients, I always try to get them something that's really distinct. And I also love supporting designers. So, I mean, to spend money on a font is not a big deal. And I mean, if I'm doing client work, that gets billed to the client anyway. So win-win for me.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
in my other work, it's like, it's just something that, I mean, I don't even think about it in any way that you would support any other artist. You would just buy a font. But yeah, in terms of like when I create my own fonts, I think in the beginning, I would definitely put them out available for free. And then, you know, as that develops and I do more, I would love to get in the font selling business.
As your fonts begin to take over the world.
Oh yes, font takeover.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird with certain fonts, because my wife used to do a little, graphic multimedia design. We used to actually do we had a little side hustle where we were designing very basic websites for a while. And it's weird. Some of the fonts actually, when you put them online, it's like they don't register with certain browsers or something. I'm probably not saying it right, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so there are web safe fonts and then fonts that are not web safe. And the a quick workaround that I can share with you is that you could just make
Smash
the font,
your computer.
throw your computer out the window.
That's the easiest and quickest.
The second easiest and quickest would be to anything that you want in that font, just export as an image and then upload that as an image on your site. And then of course wouldn't be crawlable text on your site, but then it wouldn't get formatted weird on any browser. But there is a difference between, like a normal font and a web safe font. I mean, same as if, you're making like a PowerPoint with your favorite font and then someone opens the PowerPoint and they don't have that font. So similar thing happens. But yeah, web safe fonts are a thing.
Okay, cool. Yeah. No, I think I had that idea with my wife once. I was like, oh, we'll just make it as a photo and we'll do it. And she was like, no, we want this to be clickable. And I was like, all right, well, okay. But I think that's a good tip. This is a good place to kind of switch gears, but let's take a little break because we are about ready to be cut off by the powers that be. Big Brother's listening and they're going to cut us off. So let me stop this 1 sec. Perfect. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's also creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. We are recording. At least it says it is. We'll find out later. I'll call you frantically later and be like, we didn't get anything. We have to do it over. Just remember everything you said. Man.
Font nerd.
Yeah, font nerd. Exactly. Just talk about fonts for about 2 hours and then we'll be good. So thanks for bearing with me. We're still figuring out the whole remote interview situation, but I think it's going pretty well. Let's see. So I wanted to talk to you. One of my themes in these interviews is the origin story, the superhero origin story. We already talked about you being from Ohio, like the Modest Mouse song, Ohio. And I know that you came over here from there about 7 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. But what was the kind of impetus for that? Not to use that word again, but what made you feel like this is something that I'm going to do? This is what I'm about. What provoked that move?
Honestly, I have always known I wanted to get out of Ohio. It was like, ever since I was a kid, but when the teen angst hit, that's when I was like, this isn't it. I got to leave. And then I went away to college. I'm still in Ohio. I graduated from Kent State. So I moved out here, right after college. And I mean, honestly, because I wanted to be in journalism and I wanted to work in that field, it was kind of between New York and LA. And then while I was still in school, I took an internship at LA Magazine, and I lived out here for 3 months, and I absolutely just fell in love with it. Like I had been to California a few times growing up, but
Yeah.
just living out here, and I think just having that craving to get out and then living out here for 3 months was unbelievable. And that internship was one of the greatest experiences I've had in my career. And I mean, I loved everything about the city, and I just knew immediately that I was going to live here. And my whole senior year of college was just spent planning how to move out here quicker. And
Nice.
it's funny, like I didn't walk my commencement. I was in such a rush to get out here, which looking back on it now, it's kind of crazy to think about. But actually looking back on a lot of that move was very crazy. I drove my Honda Civic from Ohio to LA, and I only packed up what would fit in the Honda Civic. So nothing was shipped. I came out here, did not have an apartment, did not have a job lined up. I knew one person who lived out here. I saved up what I thought was a lot of money. And this is me being from Ohio. So I thought $1,000 was a lot of money.
By the way, this could completely be me talking. It's almost exactly the same. But yeah, keep going.
I saved up $1,000. It's all I had in my bank account, packed up my Honda Civic, drove here, stayed with the one person I knew for a couple of days. I mean, I had a couple of job interviews lined up, but nothing was set up. I mean, I went to those job interviews. I should have known from living out here for 3 months how expensive LA is compared to Ohio, but
Right.
I was so eager to get out here that it just nothing would have
figure it out when we
me.
get there.
Exactly. And again, looking back on it now, I was like, how I would never do that now. Like, how did I do that?
Oh, I know.
But I literally, I spent 4 days on the road, made a lot of stops, came out here, like I said, did those couple of job interviews. I, as you could probably guess, ran out of money very quickly and had to become a personal assistant for someone to make money until I got a job. And so I was a personal assistant for a woman who lived in Malibu, and I was just kind of like living the best life. I was getting paid, I think like $12 an hour to walk this woman's dog on the beach. Like,
okay, this is where our stories have kind of changed. I didn't do this.
but this whole time I'm couch surfing. I'm, and it just like, I was just having the best time that it didn't really register that like, this is not sustainable.
Right.
But luckily before anything bad happened, or before I had to crawl back to Ohio, I ended up landing a job, and that was, my first real job out of college. And it was my, again, it was an entry level design position, but I thought it was a ton of money. So I was just living. I finally, I was jumping around from sublease to sublease. I didn't know what neighborhood I wanted to live in. I've lived in, I think, six different neighborhoods in LA.
Yeah.
Just because that first year I was just jumping all over the place. And
isn't that funny in LA how often people move? Like I think I moved about 12 different times since I've lived here.
No, it's so crazy. I think at one point between two places, I didn't even unpack my car. I was like, well, I might move in a couple of months, so we'll just keep it packed.
You're like, next time I'll just live in my car. That's fine.
Yeah. And I did that. And like, no, I mean, I didn't live in my car, but I kept it packed. and it's funny, I couldn't drive anyone around anywhere because it was literally packed to the brim. But I was like, I'm not unpacking because I might end this sublease and I might move somewhere else. So it was, I was living very nomadically within LA. And it was really, I mean, I feel so disconnected from that now because again, it's something that, you can only do when you're young and in that crazy mindset, I guess.
But at the same time, sorry to interrupt, but at the same time, a lot of people don't have the guts to do that. That's why I call it the superhero origin story, because it takes so much, guts to just pack up and be like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if there's any possibilities for me. I've got nothing lined up, but you know what? I'm doing it.
No, it's true. And I remember living in Ohio, and I was thinking of how unattainable LA was. Like, it was just like this, even just the mention of Los Angeles was just something that I couldn't relate to. And it felt so out of reach. And, like I remember like I would watch the OC when that was like a big show back in the day. And like, I would be like,
California.
Exactly. No, Phantom Planets. Yes. But no, I used to just it was just a dream. And to think about it now that I've been living here for so long, and I think, a part of my move and like the first few years of living here, I still had that kind of like wide-eyed curiosity and just like approach to everything. And I think that really helped fuel asymmetric in my career as well, because, I obviously came out here for work purposes. I mean, there's not much going on in these fields in Ohio. So definitely this is the place to be. But it was like having that fuel. And then that's kind of what honestly keeps me motivated is, I do get in slumps and I do get in waves of just unmotivated and having like depressive spirals. And I think that I have to remember, like, I'm in LA, and like, even though I feel very disconnected from that move and that original mindset, it's just like, I'm here and I did it all by myself. And, now's my time to keep making something of it. And I mean, it is my home now. So I feel, I think for a while,
it takes a while, right? To be like, oh wait, yeah, this is my home. Cause you first you start talking about like, oh yeah, I'm from Ohio. Cause everybody's like a transplant here, and then eventually you're like, okay, I've been here for 10 years. I guess I'm a Los Angeles person now.
Exactly. And like, to go hand in hand with that comment is, I think for me, because it didn't feel like home for so long, I had this constant feeling of like, I always need to be doing something, and like, I always need to be going somewhere, and I need to like see everything that I can see. And so like, it's funny because I have friends who are from LA, and they tell me all the time, they're like, you've done more in LA than I've done, and I've lived here my entire life. And I'm like, yeah, nice. But that's because like for the first like 3 or 4 years, I could not be stopped. I was going out every night, like, and not going out to like party, but going out and just doing things and like seeing things. And
whereas everybody else is like, I'm not driving over to the valley. Are you kidding me? I'm not doing this.
And like, one of my biggest fears was like being like, I never wanted to feel stuck in that bubble of like, I have so many friends who are like, oh, I don't go east of the 405. And I'm like, what? Like, come on. So I never wanted to get in that mindset. Like, I was always like, you know what, if there's something I want to do in the city, like, I'm going to do it. And I don't want any of these like factors of the city to influence that. And I just like, I had that mindset for so long. And just recently in the past couple of years, I was like, okay, like, this is my home. Like, I'm allowed to slow down. I'm allowed to take breaks. I'm allowed to like relax. I don't need to be on the go all of the time. But it was really hard to get out of that mindset, because I think LA does that to you. And on one hand, it's really magical and inspiring. And on the other hand, it's just exhausting. Yeah. It wears you out. It wears you down. Yeah. I had the same thing. I mean, when I first came down here, I was doing extra work. That was the first thing I tried to do, because I came down here to paint and to be an actor. I was like, yeah, I can do both, double threat. And I learned the city by just driving all over the town. Like, I would get up at 4 a.m. to do some extra work, drive up to the valley, or drive way the hell out to some Air Force base, where that was just going to be in the background. But I learned the city that way. And this was back when they had the Thomas Guide. You probably don't. Do you know what that is? I don't know what that is.
Yeah. This is like, oh man, I'm dating myself. Dinosaur. They had this physical booklet of maps called the Thomas Guide here. So before we had like GPS on the phones, you had to like, before your journey, you had to flip through the book and find the map and go like, okay, so I'm going here. Okay, I'm going here. So I got a plan to go here. Okay, I got to go here. And then you just had to kind of internalize it all. So to this day, I'm like always coaching my wife. I'm like, you know what? You have to know where you are. You have to know where north, east, south, west is. So you can get, it's a grid. You can get anywhere if you just know where you are. But now it's all GPS. But yeah, discovering and finding out how to get around this city is, it's a job in and of itself. It's
Oh
huge.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, and it's so, oh God, I wish I knew. I wish I had a Thomas guide. That sounds really cool. But I'm actually like weirdly obsessed with like maps and directions
Oh, I can give you
and
my old Thomas guide if you want.
I actually used to, when I was in college, like there was a big part of me that wanted to be a map designer. I,
Really?
oh yeah. And like, I'm
Oh, this is
obsessed with
awesome.
like
With your own
the,
font too?
oh, absolutely. And I'm obsessed with the New York subway maps, which of course use Helvetica. But that was
Of
like a
course.
huge research project. And when I was in college, I did a whole thing on that. But it's funny that you say that because it is true. And I think when I first moved out here, that was a huge source of anxiety for me. Is anytime I would get in the car, I would just feel so tense. But I mean, it never stopped me from going anywhere. But I just remember, and I mean, of course, like Ohio, there's no traffic. There
No.
aren't 6-lane freeways. Like, so I was just so tense all of the time. And, over time that kind of like fell away, thank God. And, it was something that I love doing is like kind of just like testing myself. And I've gotten so much better, just with directions and like, I'll be like, oh, I could get there without using the GPS or like, I don't need it. Or like,
There you
I
go.
used to be so stressed out whenever like I would miss a turn because I'd be like, oh no, this is going to add 20 minutes.
It's over. I'm
Um,
gonna end up in Ohio.
yeah. And I'm going to cry and I'm going to freak out. But like now it's like, oh, if I miss a turn, I miss a turn. Like maybe I'll discover a new neighborhood. So it
Oh
is a
my God,
really
it's so
awesome
important.
way to get around LA and like to learn the city is honestly just to like drive around and get lost and miss turns and
Yeah.
panic attacks and then find
Yep.
something really cool.
Well, and also, yeah, and you discover so much about yourself too. You're right. It's like a little minor win. You go, okay, oh, I got through that. I figured that out. You feel a little better about yourself. But
Yeah.
it's like this constant battle back and forth between anxiety and confidence, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you experienced this, but for me, I feel like the ocean like really grounds me. So I used to be like so bad with directions when I lived in Ohio, like directionally challenged to the extreme. And like now that I'm here, I'm like, okay, I know where the ocean is, so I know where everything is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, you need to have like one little touchstone, you know?
Exactly. And it's great. And I've become like really, really just like fascinated with the geography of Los Angeles. And I mean, again, I guess it feeds into the natural liking of maps, but
Yeah, right. I want to see you as a map maker in the next stage.
okay, so the next phase is going to be like an asymmetric map with my own fonts and
Yes.
music spots and art things. It'll be
Oh, I
cool.
love it. I love it. A
Came up
soundtrack
with that
for,
on the spot.
oh, that's awesome. And you could have a little soundtrack for each route that you take.
There you go. There
Yeah,
you go.
see, we're figuring it out. It's over. All right. Well, has this been good for you? No. I wanted to try to do a smooth segue, but speaking of anxiety, I did do some research on you. A little birdie gave me something to read, an interview of yours, which was fascinating. And part of it I was reading and I was like, man, no, man, this is like me talking right here. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this. Anxiety is such a part of, first of all, living in a big city,
Mhm.
trying to find your way. Throw on top of that the fact that you're trying to do something that other people haven't done, which is navigate your way through the art world or the music world or the writing world. How has anxiety affected you? And have you made any headway on that?
Yeah. It honestly, it affects everything I do every single day. I struggle with both anxiety and depression, so it's kind of like I always say it's just like this vicious cycle because I'll go through waves of being really anxious all the time, and then I'll go through just depressive spirals where I struggle to do anything. And
Yep.
it's they feed into each other, and it's I mean I'm sure a lot can relate, but it does
Yeah, sorry. The
affect
reason I bring this up is
everything.
so many artists do relate to this, me included. So yeah, keep going.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it does, if it does affect everything that I do. In terms of anxiety specifically, I think for me, I'm trying to think of like what part of your question to answer first.
Answer it all at once. Go.
um, it's funny. Well, something that I'll say first, and this is so I'm very open about mental health. I guess
Yeah.
I guess that's not a secret anymore. But I something that I have always like kind of joked with myself is like, oh, like what do I like better, anxiety or depression? And
Right.
I think, and it's funny that I even have to have that thought, but I've come to the terms that I like anxiety better because it proves to me that I actually do care about something. Because I think the apathy that comes along with depression, it scares me so much.
Yes.
That
That's a great point.
So like when I'm in the like full on anxiety mode, and, you know, I've had a fair share of anxiety attacks in the past, which luckily I don't have anymore. And I will touch on that as soon as I talk about how this has improved. But,
Me too, by the way.
Yeah. And I mean, those
Shout
are
out to
so
anxiety
scary.
attacks.
Yeah. Those are so scary in and of themselves. But I think it proves to me whenever I'm feeling really anxious that I do really care about something, and I care about it so strongly that it's, you know, manifesting in physical ways and externally and internally, obviously. But I think that for me, what I struggle with the most is that I get so overwhelmed. Like I'll have so many ideas and I get so overwhelmed, and, you know, to the point where like I'll inevitably shut down. And then that's when the depressive spiral starts. And,
Right.
you know, the phrase,
Because what? Because you weren't able to do any of it?
right. Cause I'll just get so overwhelmed that I'll shut down and I won't know where to start. And then, I'm depressed and hard on myself because I didn't do anything. And then that's the cycle. But I think, you know, the phrase jack of all trades, master of none, it used to haunt me so much and still does. And I think
My dad
that
warned me about that when I was a kid too. He's like, be careful, Preston. You don't want to become a jack of all trades, master of none. And now the irony is that everybody's a jack of all trades now. That's like the new thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that that's something that had always just really, really triggered my anxiety, is that I, you know, struggled with that. I struggled with imposter syndrome. I felt like I don't know what I'm doing and I didn't know how to start, and I wanted to do way too much and I couldn't focus in and be good at anything. And you know, I'm sure you can already see how these anxious patterns are starting to form in my head, because it would just be a spiral. And, you know, that on top of just like insecurities and social anxiety and the digital world and being bombarded with content and overstimulated. And I think like all of that together, just, it was, I mean, it's so much. And I think everybody has anxiety to an extent because of just like the world that we live in. But yeah, I think that for me, and then I started really like, cause the trying to do too much is what triggered it. And then I would be so anxious that again, I couldn't get anything done because I couldn't even focus, and I was jumping around so much.
Right.
And, you know, like my mind is like, at all times, it feels like 100 browser tabs are open in my mind. So it was just really hard for me to,
That's a good analogy.
slow down. Yeah, it's how I always look at it. But yeah, I found it really difficult to slow down. And I think for me, it sounds really elementary, but I think I started making lists a lot, and I started really thinking about like going back to my roots and being like, okay, why is it that I'm doing this? And honestly, I would make lists of every single thing that inspired me or like sparked any emotion. Because like I said, when I would go be so anxious that I would shut down and go into a depressive spiral, I became almost emotionless and I wouldn't feel anything. I wasn't inspired. I felt so disconnected from anything I was working on or any prior accomplishment. And, you know, it was really, really heartbreaking. And it was really confusing because I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know how to navigate it. I didn't know when it was going to end. Even anxiety periods, it's just kind of like, when is this going to end? You kind of have to like wait for it to pass. But I think,
and at the beginning, you feel like you're going to die too.
Oh, exactly. It's so jarring. And I think, so I started making lists, and I started making really basic lists of like, okay, every single thing that inspires me, because I need to get back to my roots and I need to focus and I need to, you know, remember why I'm doing, remember why I came here. And it would be like anything from, you know, like a picture I took on my phone of something I thought was pretty in the neighborhood to like, you know, things I studied in college to something I saw in high school to like an exhibit, or like, you know, it might not even be art or music related. It could be just totally like arbitrary. And I think, that has helped me a lot. I also, it was in 2016, I
Can I add
remember.
on to that real quick?
Of
Just
course.
remember what you're saying. It's funny because I just recorded an episode that I haven't put up yet, but I talk about lists also, and the power of lists of actually being able to just take some of these things off your brain, first of all, so it's not, they're all not, rummaging around in your head. That way it's out there, it's on the page, you can remember it. It takes a little bit of the anxiety away from that too. Not just your passions,
Exactly.
but it like offloads it from your brain onto onto the page.
Exactly. And like, as you know, I'm a huge on writing. So lists and even just writing long form, short form poetry, any type of writing was always my outlet to be like, okay, it's not only an expressive outlet for my emotions, which I'm an extremely emotional person and emotionally driven person, but it is like a way to just organize my thoughts and to just like start unloading some of those browser tabs from my head and putting them
Right.
on paper and being like, okay, this is what I'm working with. Like, let's do something with this instead of just live inside my head, which I do way too much. But no, and again, I think that another thing that came along with the lists are like, okay, I want to think about the people who I really look up to who were jacks of all trades, because I do believe that there's a place that I can connect all these dots of everything I love, and I don't need to get overwhelmed, and there's a way to intersect all of this. And I look at people like, obviously Andy Warhol, huge inspiration to me. He started Interview magazine. He illustrated advertisements. He obviously is known for his screen printing. He did films. Like, he did so much. Shepard Fairey is another one I strongly look up to. He has an art gallery here in LA. He's a muralist. He's a graphic designer. He does so much. He has his own design studio. And it's just like, there are people out there doing all of the things that I want to do, or close to the things that I want to do. And it is possible. And like, I just have to remember that and stay focused on that. But going back to in 2016, I remember vividly is when I started having a lot of panic attacks. And I think I had my first panic attack in like 2015. And I just had no idea what was going on. It was like absolutely the most terrifying thing ever. And then I kind of consulted with my friend who had struggled with anxiety for a long time. And she was like, no, yeah, that's like a standard panic attack. And I was like, okay. And then, they started coming more frequent. I started having trouble sleeping. It was just affecting everything I was doing. And I was like, okay, I need to do something. So I got really into meditation, and I started going to a studio, and I would go so much. Like, I would do an hour class.
And
I
we
sometimes
could just talk about this all day, Leah. I'm telling you.
No, seriously.
I want to interrupt you. I want to interrupt you at every point, but I'm trying to listen.
No, but I would go to back, like 2-hour long classes back to back. And like, I'd be in the studio for 2-3 hours at a time. It's the only thing that stopped my panic attacks. And like, to this day, I don't think I've had a panic attack since like 2017, maybe 18, but
Nice.
It's definitely been like 2 years. And, I've come really, really close, but because of what I've learned in meditation, and I meditate every single day. I try to do one morning session and one night session. Even if I prefer to go to a studio, obviously during this pandemic, that's not an option. So I've become more comfortable with at-home meditation. But
do you use an app, or do you just do your own thing?
I do use an app. I use Calm, which I really like.
Calm too.
Yeah, yay! Shout out to Calm.
Come on, are we talking to ourselves here? What's going on?
I really like Calm. I've tried a couple different apps, and that's my favorite. But as you know, Calm is like 15-minute little meditations for the most part. So I kind of use it as like a starting point and like a foundation. And then I try to extend it, because like I said, when I would go to a studio, it would be 45 minutes to an hour. And I got so much out of that, because it takes me 15 minutes just to slow my brain down. So by the time the meditation's up on the app, I'm like, wait, but I'm ready to meditate now. So I would prefer to sit there for like at least a half hour and really get into it. But the more comfortable I am meditating at home, and the things that I've learned through that practice, I've just been able to talk myself down from a lot of anxiety attacks. And I've really been able to, again, like zero in. And I think, one of the hardest things that I will ever do in my life, and many people will do, is just like reshifting your focus. And because I I mean, I
Yeah,
know
because
this
it's
is
your
all
lizard brain trying to control you and try to keep you safe. And we're not in harm's way all the time, but it's trying to convince you that you are. One of the,
exactly, yeah.
one of the things that like really resonated with me with when I read your interview or your article, and I was like, I can't wait to talk to her about this, is the detachment from your inner voice, which is like,
Hmm.
I don't know if you're an Eckhart Tolle person. Have you ever listened to Eckhart Tolle or read any of his stuff?
No, I
Power
haven't.
of Now or A New
Oh, I
Earth.
have. I have read The Power of Now.
Yeah, it's like he had like a mental collapse at one point, and he heard himself saying, "I can't live with myself," and he's like, "Well, that's interesting." Just the idea of living, I can't live with myself, almost like I'm two people in the same person, and that's what the voice in the head is. It's typically a negative voice, and it's typically
Hmm.
like chattering away and feeding all the anxiety and depression, all these problems. And if you can just step back from that and witness the voice and realize that it's not you, it's
Hmm.
like this lizard brain talking to you. And if you can just kind of witness it, that's what meditation does. I think that's where you're going. But
No,
meditation, you can step back and witness it and not judge it. And then be like, you get better at controlling it as you go.
absolutely. And that's something that I strongly practice myself. And I encourage anybody who struggles with any mental health to do that, is to do just that, is imagine that these thoughts are a separate person, because when you do separate it, it's much easier to conquer. It's much easier to have those conversations with yourself, because when you think it's you, you just go further down that spiral of like, well, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm not good enough. Like, all of those intrusive thoughts start coming in, and
It becomes hopeless.
it absolutely hopeless. And I think, so meditation definitely, yeah, has, I mean, I would be willing to say like saved my life. Like it's changed so much of my mental health. But, I think too, just like, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, it's okay. I'll jump in while you are
Yeah,
thinking
go
about it.
ahead.
For any artist out there who's struggling with this, I also struggled with this, and to throw into the mix, heavy drinking, which I would self medicate myself. So I would have anxiety, panic attacks at work where I'd have to sit down at a table. I was waiting tables, and I would literally have to just sit down at a table for the rest of the shift because I couldn't function. And I
Hmm.
thought I was having a heart attack. And then I would go home once I finally got myself together enough to go home. I would go home and I would drink and I would self-medicate, and then I would feel much better. Obviously, I'd calm down. But then in the morning, I would feel even worse and depressive. So I completely understand that cycle that you're talking about. I don't know
That
if you got your train of thought back, but
I did. I did
okay,
get my
good.
train of thought back. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
But no, yeah, the cycle is dangerous and scary. But no, what I was going to say is that for me, I also the hardest thing that I've been practicing is just re-shifting my focus, because I'm the type of person where like I have all consuming thoughts all of the time, and they just take up my mental capacity, and it
yeah.
becomes really difficult to do anything. I mean that's anxiety at its core, and I'm such a dweller. So on top of that, it's just like I just start dwelling on past things, and I'll read like, I mean,
Oh
this
my
is
God.
almost embarrassing to admit,
Yeah.
but like I will go back and I will like read text messages over and over and over and over again until I'm just like numb to it, I
Yeah,
guess.
you're
And
you're
it's
you're making me nervous right now. This is what I
what?
was just doing this today. I was just doing this today. I started obsessing about my childhood friend and I needed to talk to him and like get this thing off my chest. And I was like, I got to the point where I almost called him and like we haven't spoken really. And finally I was like, no, you got to get to work. You got an interview coming up.
Yeah, no, I get so sidetracked by these all-consuming thoughts, and then I just I mean, I think that too is like meditation helps me just be like, okay, you have to slow down. And again, this is the
For
list
sure.
making comes in here too, because I think that when my anxiety or even depression for that matter kind of go off the rails, like I just need to stay grounded and stay focused. And I think that that's something that I also have struggled with, is that I've always felt that I've like lacked a sense of stability, and I've felt that I often visualize it as like I feel like I'm just like floating around, and like I'm just doing things, but like nothing feels grounded and nothing feels rooted. And I have to remember, like, I do have roots and I do have these things. So I think just focusing on those, it's so important. But it's
Yeah.
so easy to lose
Almost
sight
like the
of.
ocean for you with directions, finding those little
Exactly.
touchstones. Yep.
Absolutely. No, yeah. So having personal mental touchstones, it's vital. And I think that I still struggle with that a lot, with just like feeling stable and feeling secure and feeling grounded in my own work and passions and personal life. And it is a struggle, but I think the best thing that I could do for myself and others could do for themselves is just to be really aware of it. I always say, like, I'm so hyper self-aware. Like I'm constantly, like, I acknowledge what's going on in my brain. I'm aware of it. And I think that's the first step. And then conquering it is of course the hard part. But
Right.
I think acknowledging what's going on is really important, because for so long you could just write it off as normal, or like, um, as just a phase. And, it very well could be, but that could also turn into a pattern, and that could also, lead down another spiral or a black hole. And I've been in far too many black holes.
Yeah. And the more you allow that to happen, the more ingrained it'll be. And it will become kind of the pattern will become cemented kind of in your brain. Your neural pathways will form, and you're going to
Yes.
just start repeating that over and over again. So yeah, becoming the witness of your thoughts and being able to witness when you're having these behaviors is really a good point. And I think a lot of people listening will, get something out of that for sure.
Yeah. And I think, again, talking about, pretending there's a person in your head and those negative or intrusive thoughts belong or to them. For me, I've even like wrote about that a lot in my writing. Like, I address like a her, and it's always my depression or my anxiety. It's not a person. And I think that too, just to stop that pattern and to stop that way of thinking, is just to have that conversation with the person in your head and just be like, no, like, we're not making this a pattern. Like, this is not the new normal. Like, this
Right.
will end. And yeah, it's so important. So, I mean, whatever anyone has to do to cope, but that has really helped me. And I think it all ties together. I talk to the voice in my head through meditation a lot. And sometimes through meditation, I'm able to just like focus on what I want to do that day. So it depends, but it's all very beneficial.
Oh yeah, no, those are all great tools, and it's funny because it's unfortunately it's not a quick fix, right? It's something that you have to keep doing. Like I'll have days where I feel like I got it, I figured it out, I know how to deal with myself, and then I find that every single day I have to basically remind myself of these things. So it's a practice, like a spiritual practice. It's something that you don't just get one day. Obviously, you get better at it, but you have to keep doing it. Meditation helps to kind of solidify that if you make that into a daily practice.
Absolutely. And it takes a while. I mean, if anyone who is listening is not keen on meditation or can't get into it, like, I highly encourage just sticking with it, because it does take a while. And after a while, I think you get so much out of it, and you'll get deeper into your meditation practice. And that's what I love about it, is because you can just learn something new about yourself every time you do it.
Yeah, that's so true.
Or even if you don't, I mean, there are days where you may not get anything out of it, but at least that's a half hour where you were able to just like take a breath and slow down and sit down. And
Yeah, you might
that
not
in
have.
and of itself is a benefit.
Yeah, you might not think that you got something out of it, but your body did.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think a lot. I've talked about this before too, but a lot of the problem with meditation is people think that they're supposed to be just meditating and quieting their thoughts, and no thoughts should be coming. But actually, it's the opposite of that. It's normal for your thoughts to come in. It's just a matter of becoming better, letting them come up, and then letting them fade away too, and just focusing back on the
Exactly.
breath. So if
And
you're doing that and you got thoughts popping up, then you're on the right track.
exactly. And I think, I mean, meditation itself as a term, like, meditate on those thoughts. Like, you're allowed to acknowledge that a thought came into your head. You're allowed to wonder. I mean, that thought came into your head for a reason, and you're allowed to think about it and then let it pass and then move on to the next thought or move on to the next breath. And I think something that I did in a recent meditation practice that I really, really enjoyed, and I kind of have carried with me since I've done it, is kind of this like idea of taking mental inventory of those thoughts, and just in terms of like an emotion that's associated with them. So any thought that you have at any given time, like, start to train your brain to think like, okay, is that a negative thought? Is that a positive thought? Does that make me feel good? Does that make me feel bad? And then kind of take mental inventory of how many of my thoughts every day are negative versus positive. And like, I honestly do the same thing with everything in my life. Like, I'm constantly aware of and looking at like, okay, who are the people in my life who are fueling me and energizing me? And and I can do the same for them, versus those conversations I walk away from feeling drained and defeated, or anything. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be an event. It could be a place. It could be
The
anything.
news.
And yeah, it could be the news. It could be any source of anything that's coming into your brain and affecting you. I feel like it's so important to realize like how it makes you feel, and like those times that do feel really good, because, there were periods of my life, and I still struggle with this, where like nothing felt good for so long. And I
Yeah.
think that, you start to really just like, I got to a point where I was just like, anything that brings me like any amount of joy, no matter what it is, like we're doing it. Like, even if that means like getting a cupcake that I want, to like going
Right.
on a trip, like it could be big, it could be small, but like anything. And I think that just like also carrying that mentality of like, okay, like remembering like what does make me feel good, remembering what brings me joy, like, and I think it's so important to just do that. And even just with your thoughts, and while you're meditating, like speaking of all consuming thoughts, like most of mine are negative, or
Yeah.
anxiety inducing. And like I said, like that spiral continues. So I think just kind of trying to rid of the negative thoughts and incorporate more things in my life that make me feel good and energized. And
Yeah, well, you're stacking up like little wins, this
exactly.
makes me feel better. Okay, now you reach for the next thing that makes you feel better. And then pretty soon you've got a positive pattern going. I think it's funny because I used to almost have this kind of voice in my head that was always like, watch out, things are going well, watch out, something bad's gonna happen, that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
the more I go along in my life and with my art business, it's so important. It's almost imperative for me to be in a positive state of mind all the time. And that doesn't mean I force positivity, but like you're saying, I cut out all the negative forces. If people are negative, I try to limit that. If it's like family members, I try to limit that. But I found that the most important thing, almost even more than having like a practice every day, is my state of mind. So if I am happy, if I'm feeling good and I'm feeling positive and energetic, that's already a win. I know I'm going to get something good out of the day, because if I'm not, the wheels come off and I just can't even get going. So I've just learned, part of the reason why I've been able to become a full-time artist is because I've been able to cultivate just having a positive state of mind and positive energy moving forward with my day. So I start out with a run because it just gets me going. If I don't run every day, I already know that I'm not going to make it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just important to keep the positive energy flowing. That's like the most important thing, because otherwise you're not going to be able to create.
Oh, absolutely. And I relate to, if you are having a good day, or you wake up in a good mindset, like you're going to get something out of the day. And for me, it's like it's sad to say, but if I'm having a really good day, like that's a rarity. So we need to like take that and savor that and milk that for everything I can, and try to make that last as long as possible, because
Yeah.
similar to you, of like, I don't necessarily think like, oh, things are going well, something bad is going to happen. But I am aware of the cycle that my mind goes through. And I'm like, okay, well, this happiness or this positive mindset could very well be short lived. So I need
Right.
to make the most
Exactly.
of it right now. And I need to, and those are like the spurts of inspiration and productivity that I have. And I'm able to start something new. And then that creating that fuels it to last longer, and that fuels the next spurt of inspiration. So I take it when it comes, and I try to just savor it as much as possible.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I'm going to shift onto something else. I feel like I normally ask people right now about their secret weapon or their superpower. It feels like maybe one of yours, if not the one, is meditation. Correct me if I'm wrong. But is there another secret weapon that you have as like a creator, something that kind of gets you into that place where you can create at a peak level?
Um,
If it's meditation, that's okay too.
Meditation is a big one. But I think meditation for me is kind of, I'm sure it fuels my creativity, but I think it affects my personal life and just day to day living more than anything. I think,
Yeah.
specifically creative speaking. Um, Honestly, I would have to say writing. I write a lot for my career for actual writing, but I think just writing out my thoughts, like I'm always one to journal, or the notes app in my phone is just filled with things like I just any thoughts that I have that I think are significant or that I just need to get out of my brain. I think I just write them down, and
Yeah.
that honestly fuels so much that I create. Whether it does end up turning into more writing, longer form or poetry writing, or if it just kind of turns into something I go back to, and I'm like, I read this line, and because I think, speaking of feeling disconnected from things, I think I'll think something and I will almost immediately feel disconnected from it, or I'll do something and I'll almost immediately feel disconnected from it. And it's such a weird phenomenon. So I think I love just writing everything down, because then I am able to go back to it. And even if I don't
It's like
feel
a
that
time
exact,
capsule.
exactly. And it's like, even if I don't feel that exact feeling, I at least have documentation to be like, okay, well, I remember that I felt that way. And so that is
Right.
usually enough for me to create something off of it, or to spark new feelings, or, hopefully not dwell on it. But, the plus side of being a dweller is that I get a lot of work out of it. So
Yes.
there's that. But I think, honestly, anything I do creative wise is so emotionally driven. I mean, anything I do in my life is emotionally driven. So I think just documenting those emotions and being aware of them. And I'm always one to want to talk about feelings. And if I don't have anyone to talk to about them, I will write them in my phone, and that will fuel it. So I think writing is my secret weapon.
Oh, that's awesome. It's almost like a shortcut to getting you there, because you look at it and you remember this feeling. It triggers a feeling, almost like a smell, triggers nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
This triggers your creativity.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's cool.
Absolutely.
Would you say it's similar to journaling or not?
Um, I would say so. I've never, I don't want to say I've never done journaling. I'm sure that I have, but I don't journal in the sense of like I'm logging what I do during the day, or,
Right.
even logging things that happen to me. I don't necessarily do that, but I guess it is a sense of journaling, in just the way that I am documenting feelings almost on a daily basis. And even they might just be like one liner things, or I mean, like I said, I'm always living in my head, which I know is not good, but I'm constantly just like reevaluating myself and the way that I'm thinking. And I'll come up with like a new way of thinking about the same thing, or maybe it's the same thing in different words. I don't know. It very well could be, but words are just so important to me. And I actually have a note in my phone that's called Line Bank, and it's literally just like lines that I think of, and not necessarily to use in like a poetic sense, but just like one liner thoughts that don't really have an end place, but
Oh,
I
that's
feel
cool.
like I just want to write them down. And so I have like all of these just like one line thoughts and feelings just like documented in my phone. And occasionally when I am lacking inspiration, I mean, I try not to seek it out directly in that sense, but sometimes I do just like go onto my notes app on my phone, and I'm like, all right, let me scroll through some of these and see if I could build on any of these, even just emotionally. I mean, even just for like personal development, but if I can get something creative out of it, that's a win-win. But I mean, I guess it is. I probably do write every day. So I guess that would be journaling in a way, but it definitely not like, I don't keep like a diary under my bed and write about who I talked to that day or whatever.
Right. Dear diary.
Dear diary, today he asked me what font this was.
Dear diary, shut the fuck up. Leave me alone. Yeah, no. So it sounds like they're almost like little aphorisms, or like a step before an aphorism, like a half-baked aphorism almost. Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah, it does. It's definitely just like, I don't know. Anytime I have like a new thought, it's almost like, I shouldn't say anytime I have a new thought, because we're constantly having new thoughts as humans, but
Right.
anytime I just like have a new perspective on something, I have epiphany moments like all of the time. And I think that just writing that down is just my way of doing just that, is just putting pen to paper and documenting it. And, like sometimes I do go back and it's motivating in a sense, but for the most part, I mean, I try to build off it creatively.
I think that's great. I think those two great takeaways from you, for people, for artists, for young artists, for anybody really, is meditation for your personal life and creative life, and then writing down these thoughts. My wife forced me to write stuff down, and it completely changed my world, because I'm one of those people who has a bunch of thoughts all the time too, and then I just forget about them. Like, oh, it's a great idea. I'll remember it later. and then you don't do it. So wouldn't you say you actually have a higher probability of following through on things if you write it down?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. So that's a good takeaway for people too coming up. Start writing things down.
Write things down. And if you're driving in the car, leave
Wait,
yourself a voice memo. Like do whatever you
yes.
have to do to like
Talk to
get your
Siri.
thought out, especially if you're like us and you have so many thoughts all the time and you struggle with anxiety, get these thoughts down.
Yes, for sure. Talk to Siri or Alexa or whoever it
Yes.
is, whoever robot that you're talking to. What about on the flip side? Do you have like a biggest failure or a failure that you have had in your creative career and has been like a good learning experience for you?
Gosh, where do I start?
I've had 5 today. One of them is talking to you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh no, never. I think that, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I have like a big failure that I can chalk up to being like, oh, I failed at this and it led me to this, or I got rejected from this and I led me to this. I mean, of course, I've had my fair share of rejections and failures, but I think
Yes.
just like, I think in general, like not necessarily like a tangible failure that I can pinpoint, but just like the feeling of being a failure, if that can be my answer, because
Interesting.
I think a lot of times, and again, it goes hand in hand with anxiety and depression, but just like the insecurities and feeling like I have like failed myself or failed other people when I'm in that mindset of feeling like I can't do the things that I had set out to do. So it's a lot of, I would say, personal failures that, I mean, it's one of those things where it's only a failure to me because, I set out these goals and I didn't reach them, or I, fell into a depressive spiral and had to put it off. And I think too, just like, a lot of failures with personal relationships, I think have like fueled a lot of what I've done and what I want to do. And yeah, I mean, and again, it's just like imposter syndrome comes into play a lot where that's like a constant.
And that's a big one for artists too. I've talked about that too. I think that affects all artists.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I think like, I don't necessarily have like a quote unquote biggest failure, but I think just like just struggling with the mental health things that we've talked about. And also like, I don't know, I think like for so long, I definitely had like a lull in asymmetric and in other areas of my career where I was so discouraged and I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And I had no direction. And again, just like lack of grounding and stability. And I think that I saw that as a failure because I was just so heartbroken and confused and I didn't want to carry on with it. And then I mean, I can't even say what exactly happened that fueled it back up, but I think that like my biggest takeaway from the failures is to just not be so set on a specific path, like let things evolve. Like if you told me 4 years ago I would be into events, I would have laughed. I would have been like, no, I'm not an event planner. I'm not a curator. Like I'm a writer and I'm a designer and I'm a journalist and I'm a storyteller and that's what I want to do. And I was so set in that. But I mean, like things, if you just kind of let go of that grasp and let things evolve the way that they're going to evolve. Like the most I ever feel like myself is when I'm hosting an event or when I'm planning something or when I'm bringing all those elements together in that environment and in that way. And I never would have gotten to that point if I didn't have that lull of just being like, well, I have no idea what I want to do. And again, like that feeling of failure led me to being like, again, anything that brings joy into my life, we're going to take it. We're going to do it. And those small sparks and steps, and as you said, like we're stacking up the positivity, like that ultimately led to like, oh, hey, I am interested in events. And I never would have discovered that had I not let myself like explore these like random small joys, or like I am interested in, X, Y, and Z. And so just like letting myself open those doors and go down those paths because I felt like such a failure because I didn't want to do what I started doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I again wouldn't say I necessarily, it's like a
like not
failure,
one big one, but yeah.
But, well, no, but I felt like a failure for like 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I know the feeling, but no, I think that's called growth and evolving. I mean, we talked about that too. I think people have a conception of what success is, or they have a picture in their head of what that looks like. I think that's great. That's a great starting point. But allowing that to evolve as you go is imperative. So I think you're spot on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what advice would you give to a young Leah?
Oh.
Coming up, you don't know anything. You're in Ohio still. You got stars in your eyes. I'm going to move to the big town. What would you give? What advice would you give yourself?
I mean, I think honestly, like and it's advice that I'm still trying to give myself, my adult Leah self, is just to like go.
Well, you are still young. Sorry.
It's just to go so easy on yourself, like be patient with yourself, forgive yourself. Like, I think all of those go hand in hand with creativity, but it all also touches on all of the mental health things that we talked about. And I think that was just like such a big struggle for me when I was, developing myself creatively, is I would be so hard on myself, and and again, it's the cycle that we keep talking about, but I would be depressed and I couldn't produce anything. I would be so hard on myself about it. And then that would turn into more negative thoughts. And I mean, like, the biggest piece of advice is just like, whatever it is that you are holding yourself to or looming over your own head, just like forgive yourself for that, because you can't do anything about it. Like, all you could do is like move forward. And I think, you have to just like pave the way for yourself, and you can't do that if you're stuck in a black hole and wallowing. Yeah. And I think that was just like my biggest thing. And I mean, like, coming out here from Ohio, I don't, again, like, I feel so disconnected from that, because I don't even remember how I did that logistically, or like what mindset I was in. I mean, like, I know that I was just like hungry and craving work and craving a new scene. And I'm so glad I made that jump. But I think too, like, with that, it might sound cliche, but like, if there's something that you want to do, like, you just have to do it. Because if you hold yourself back, at least for me, like, if I hold myself back from anything, like, that's just me falling back into, I keep saying the black hole, but that's what it is. That's me just falling back into a black hole. So again, like, any positivity I have in my life, like, I have to hold on to that and just keep going.
Yeah, well, that's super important. It's funny because I recorded this too. I feel like this is a preamble to this other episode that I recorded. But it's like, if you let your negative thoughts have a chance to catch up, you won't do anything. Right. You just got to act on that impulse. If you trust yourself and you trust your instincts and your creativity, just do it before you give yourself a chance to talk yourself out of it. Right.
Right. And to that point too, I think, like, if there's something that you want to do that seems like it doesn't make sense, again, imposter syndrome, I can't do that. Like, you kind of have to just do it anyway. Like, don't wait around for someone else to do it. And I think that was a huge struggle for me career-wise, is like, I had all these things that I wanted to do. I didn't know how they connected. I, again, felt like I couldn't do all of them, and it just didn't make sense in my mind. And I was like, okay, yeah. This doesn't make sense. I can't be doing this. But then I like would see things that I liked. We talked about pancakes and booze. I don't know if you've ever heard of Drago, but that's another huge one for me. If you're not familiar. So Drago is, I think they just describe themselves as a contemporary art publishing house, which is phrasing I've never heard before. And they're based in Italy. And I discovered them when I was over in Italy in 2017. And it was one of those epiphany moments where I went to this art exhibit in Rome, put on by Drago, and it was like this moment where just everything clicked for me, because they had this, it was a very thematic art exhibit. Then they had like they have their whole publishing house side where they had all of these books and like print collateral and just like things that I was already doing. And they found
when you say books, are you talking about like art print books, like prints of the work, or actual writing as well?
Yeah, like art books that were all the work, but they were super thematic books. And there was just like so many editions and all of these really awesome collaborations. And it was just one of those things where it took me seeing it to realize, wait, like, I could do everything that I want to do because I'm seeing it now and it all makes sense. But like, the advice that I would give to a younger me is like, don't wait to see it to think it makes sense. Like, just if there's something you want to do, just find a way to do it, because if you don't do it, someone else will. And like, that's the hardest thing, is like, I just struggle with that. And then I look for inspiration of what other people are doing. And we don't have to open that door of comparing ourselves to others, because as artists, we all do it, and it's so dangerous. But
Yeah.
I think that like, if you could do something that's just so true to yourself and unique and what you want to do, and just find a way to do it without having an example set forth for you first, like, that's so important. And I would go back and tell myself to just like, don't question it, just go and do it. You don't have to see it being done first.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And also, just to further that, nobody was able to do anything at first. They all had to discover their path too. It wasn't like, oh, this
Right.
person was born able to do this, I will grow up to do Drygo. It's like they had to discover that as well. So if they can
Right.
discover it, you can discover it.
Exactly. It's exactly that. I have nothing else to add.
Awesome. Speechless. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Well, we're kind of getting close to wrapping up, but I wanted to ask you, especially in this time, we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but what are you excited to work on, or what are you working on right now to kind of propel you into the future, back when we get to some state of normalcy?
Yeah. So I'm taking this time to do a number of personal projects. I know I touched on developing my own fonts, which is hugely time consuming project.
I'm trying to come up with a name for that font, by the way.
So that's been that's a kind of a slow moving process, because it's just, working with all new software, and but it's something that I'm excited to dive into. And then again, it's just that exploration of that this time has forced me into. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise. But, before I didn't know what the future of journalism looks like. I still can't answer that for you, but I'm forced to explore how it will look in a digital world. And I think what I do during this time, and in exploring that and researching and getting my ideas out, and figuring out ways I want to take that into the physical world when we're free. And, and again, I don't know what that looks like, but, maybe it's having AR elements at an art exhibit, or maybe it's scanning stuff on your phone in a gallery that pops up a playlist, or, there's like a number of things that I've like crossed my mind that are just like, okay, now I just need to figure out how to, execute all of these. And I do think that this adjustment is going to be really positive for a lot of industries. And like you said, that there's going to be a craving for physical spaces and events and things like that when this is all said and done. So I'm really excited for that time, and to incorporate everything I'm exploring now into that. And in addition to that, I'm just keeping up with Asymmetric, trying to use it not only as the storytelling tool that it's been, but I'm hoping to also use it to help motivate artists who might also be struggling with creating content. Musicians, especially, like, all of their tours got canceled and shows got canceled. And a lot of musicians even stopped putting music out. But it's like, now's the time, like, put your music out, like do all of the things. And so, like, if it takes hopefully like an interview or a magazine feature to help spark them, like, that's just a bonus for me. I hope I could do that for someone else.
Yeah, no, you're right. And more than anything, it's a challenge, because the people who end up like surviving times like this are the people who are able to adapt, right? So I think this is an adaptation period, but it's also a great time to kind of take stock and to think about what we're going to do next. And it sounds like you're doing that.
Exactly. And too, I think it's worth pointing out that, why, like, I used to like wish for this time so much, and now I have it. Time is my most valuable resource, and I'm always struggling with how to balance my time and what to do with my time.
Well, it's everybody's, right?
Exactly. And so I think I've been wishing for this, and I do want to be productive and create, and I am, and I'm doing all of those things, and I feel good about it. But I also think that the hustle culture is coming in strong during this time too. And I think that could be just as detrimental if, you put so much pressure on yourself to create. So I do think that this is a good time to kind of also slow down, do other things for yourself that will ultimately benefit your creativity and fuel it in the long run, and like take a breath. And, you don't have to be producing every second of the day, but using this time to really explore the things that you want to do and that I want. I mean, that's what I've been doing, but I'm also like being very cognizant of being like, okay, like let me also get through my reading list. Like, let me, I weirdly got into video games. Like, I'm like trying to
Nice.
balance my time with also recreational things because that's so important. And we're all dealing with anxiety and dread and sadness right now. And it's important to just do all of these things to help yourself cope.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a good point, is not just to create for creation's sake or to basically take your mind off all this, but it's to focus on consciously creating, not just forced productivity. You know what I mean? I kind of have
Mm-hmm.
I like the hustle culture, but I think it's gone too far. It takes away from the time that you can spend ruminating and really letting something come from like a conscious place. I think this is a
Right.
good time to kind of get back in touch with yourself. I'm
Oh,
trying to do that.
absolutely.
I'm saying that to myself too, because I'm keeping my head down and I'm creating a lot and I'm working probably even more than I used to. But I also have my wife at a job, so I'm alone. I got to do something with my time or I'm going to go crazy.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Hey, I'm alone too. So
we're alone together.
we're in this together.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but,
exactly.
but no, yeah, to your point, I mean, I love the hustle culture too, but I do think that especially to young artists, it could be, a lot of pressure. And I think if anybody can relate to my mindset, it's like, if, speaking of failures, it's like, if you're not creating all of the time, you feel like a failure. And that's not true. Like, you need to find balance. You need to segment your time. You need to do something for fun. Like, I don't
Yeah,
remember. I mean,
you've got to
recently,
build up new experiences too, so you can then turn them into something.
exactly. And I mean, a lot of us aren't experiencing much while we're being isolated, but you still need to have. Most of my adult life, I never had a passive hobby. All of my hobbies were extremely stressful and involved like creating or producing something. And, stressful,
It
not
doesn't sound like a
necessarily.
hobby. It sounds like a job.
I mean, stressful, not necessarily negatively though, but I mean, it is,
Yeah,
it's, you're putting a lot of work into it and you love it and you're passionate about it, but it still ends up being stressful because you're working.
yeah,
And
I agree.
I think discovering, or I should say rediscovering, some of my passive hobbies during this time has hugely impacted me because it also has really helped with my anxiety. Like, I mean, I'm feeling anxious about the condition of the world, but in terms of like my personal anxiety, I mean, I don't have much to dwell on these days. So I'm actually able to slow down and, take breaks and try to segment my days between meditation and reading a book and creating something. And again, just it's all about the balance.
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost one of those things where, there's the be careful what you wish for, but also it's like when your worst nightmare kind of comes true, it's like, okay, well, now we're in it. So it's like I'm experiencing a global pandemic and everything is shutting down. Okay, so now you just kind of forced to roll with it, and it is weird. In one way, it is very stress inducing or anxiety inducing, but in another way, it's almost in a very bizarre way. I don't want to belittle what people are going through because we're all going through it, but it's almost calming in a way because it's like, okay, we're experiencing the worst right now, so we
Mhm.
only have a place to go up now. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think it's like the way I've been looking at it is like, yeah, this horrible thing has been going on, but this is like the universe like forcing us to just slow down and like
Oh yeah, and to stop
I'm
polluting.
stop polluting. And but no, you're right. I mean, there really is like, this is kind of like a worst case scenario. I know a lot of people, we're all saying it feels like the apocalypse because it really does. And
Yeah, it
but
does.
that's a good point that you made, that there really is only up to go. And I mean, I'm looking forward to getting out of this and seeing what everybody does, and it's going to change so much, if not
Oh my
everything.
god.
So I'm excited, like the current world needed a change.
Yeah, for sure. I'm optimistic too. Well, we've got kids screaming in the background, which is the sign that we should probably wrap up a little bit. But I love what you're doing. I love asymmetric. I'm gonna keep checking in on your musical advice. Obviously, I'm gonna look up the bands that you told me. But where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yeah. So if they're interested in asymmetric, I think we already said it, but I'll say it again, asymmetricmag.com, asymmetric magazine on Instagram. If you're interested in me personally, Leah Perrino on Instagram. I'm more active on Instagram than any other social media, so that's the best place. But yeah, I'm always happy to chat music, to chat design. I usually post what I'm listening to. I love making playlists, art recommendations. I'm full of it all. So if anybody wants to chat, I'm yours.
Awesome. Be careful what you say. No, we don't have that many people listening yet. But down the road, when this starts spiking, it's gonna be like 5 years from now, and all of a sudden, everybody's gonna be hitting you up.
I hope I could come back on in 5 years and be like, wait, guys, I'm still fulfilling font requests.
Yeah. I'm no longer. I have a different name now, so you can't reach me.
Oh my gosh, it's gonna be the where are they now? And
oh my god,
I'm just gonna be sweating behind a computer looking for fonts.
Oh my god, see, now we have to do it. 5 years, you're back. Is it a date?
It's a date.
Interview date. I don't want to make my wife angry.
Hopefully we could be in person and not a remote interview in 5 years.
Oh my God, please. Yes. I mean, I love these remote interviews because it gives us a chance to connect, but we definitely will do a round 2 in person. I'd love it.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, if there's anything else you'd like to say real quick, have at it. Otherwise, I feel pretty good.
No, I think we covered so much. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. Like I said, this is the most I've talked to anybody in probably 30 days. So
oh, that's awesome. I'm glad I got to be that person. This has been
great.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to get a lot out of it. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye. This has been the Living Artist Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I just want you to know that I appreciate you being here, and I'm grateful to be in your ears. Your art and creative life on this planet is meaningful, so thank you for sharing it with me. If you like this podcast, whatever platform you're listening to it on, please subscribe and share it with your friends. You can also leave me a positive review to show your support. This helps me to reach more people with the algorithmic magic and keep the show going strong. If you want to see more of what I do and check out the art that I create, you can visit my website at www.pmsartwork.com or follow me on social media everywhere at PMS Artwork. That's it for now. See you back here next time.